You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. So I'm dragging today. I don't know if you could see that.
Yes, you're not hiding it very well.
I'm a mess.
You are. You had yourself a fun weekend though, right?
It seems like such a good idea when you're planning a trip to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. And like your buddy is saying, oh, we're going to get into this distillery here, and then we're going to go to this one over here. And he's like booked like 4 of them a day. And you're like, oh, well, you know, isn't the first one here starting at 9:30 in the morning? Is that a little early? And everybody's like, oh, it's a drinking trip. Of course we're going to start early. This is going to be great. And you're in your mid-40s, and I'm feeling it. Like, I don't know. Like yesterday when we started our last things, I had the shivers as I got going at the first tasting. I was like, I can't. My body was like, what are you doing? Like, what is wrong with you? How much bourbon are you going to drink? Are we going to die here? Like, that's kind of how it felt. Bardstown Distilling Company was incredible. Their campus is amazing. It's like going to the Google of bourbons, and they've only been around for like about 10 years. Don't do the regular tour. Like, the regular tour will walk by us and look sad. Because we were on like one of the private tours, which is only like $30. I mean, it really was worth it. I don't know what you're paying for the regular tour, $10? Like, you know, man up and get in the good one, because the good one brought us into where all the barrels were, and we were taking straight draws off of barrels. So everything was like, you know, an ounce and a half of like off of like all these different barrels, and got to like tour the facility. And every time our little group would see the regular tour go by, they all looked very sad looking at us. So they were like, when do we get a drink? And it's like, oh, you cheaped out, right? So.
You get a drink when you go back in and buy the bottles.
Yeah, and buy it when you go walking in. So, I mean, that one was really good. We found a place called Whiskey Thief, which was insane. And it was random because one of the guys screwed up when he was planning everything out with the geography. And he thought we could make 4 roses and get to Jim Beam. And they're so far away from each other. Like, we had to be at Jim Beam in like 20 minutes, and they were like a 50-minute ride. And we're like, we're not going to make this one. So then we were just driving along, and we saw a sign for Whiskey Thief. And we're like, oh, let's just see if they'll let us walk in. Or maybe they got a bar. We'll get a drink before we get to the next thing. And we walked in, and they take walk-ins, and they only sell when you're on their farm. They have no distribution. And it was like the coolest thing.
Secret whiskey. I love it.
It was secret whiskey is what it was. And
secret whiskey.
It was good stuff. So, I mean, like, those are my 2 big recommendations. I did go into Michter's, and I did go stop over at Rabbit Hole. I had been there before. I've always liked those 2. But, I mean, like, those are my 2 big recommendations that were new on this trip. If you ever get into bourbons and you want to go down to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, go do that. I would also say, don't do it for 4 straight days, as my body can attest to. My children looked at me like, look at poor dad. He's going to die when I walked in the door yesterday.
I will say this. You're here.
Yeah.
Okay. You are upright. You are functional.
A lot of fun though. And if you ever go down there, or if you ever want any like suggestions, tips, you want to reach out, hit me up on social media, use the contact form over at soxinthebasement.com. Leave me a message. I'll get back to you. I'm happy to tell you. I'm happy to give you my recommendations. I'm happy to tell you which ones I wouldn't go to. Like last year, I didn't like Angel's Envy. I thought that they were kind of pretentious and they didn't give you very much for their tour. And this year, Heaven Hill was like a huge disappointment. So like, I'll tell you the good ones and the bad ones. Why waste your time?
So
okay.
The ones with a religious theme to them seem to be a little bit on the don't go there, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
So like
if it's bourbon and religion mixed, don't do it.
No, but it's kind of funny because I didn't even realize that. But those were the 2. Those were the 2 that were like, I don't know, in my opinion, over the last 2 years doing it, they were the worst. And there's so many different options down there. You just want to avoid the ones that are bad because you're not going to get to every one of them. There's so many of them down there. And that's the problem. My buddy's like trying to get them all. And so because I was trying to get them all, I didn't see any White Sox stuff all weekend long. So I need you to catch me up. This episode of Sox in the Basement is brought to you by Cork and Carry at the Park, a tradition in the shadow of the ballpark. Get their pregame, get their postgame, watch it in-game over at 33rd and Princeton. The official home of Sox in the Basement is Cork and Kerry at the park. 2-for-1 burgers when you dine in on Mondays on non-Sox home games, and that is an award-winning menu of burgers and ballpark favorites. And I cannot wait for Parade Day, which I know is coming up soon. I know the Southside Irish Parade is announcing later on this week. They're doing their presentation of all their grand marshals. So parade season is opening up near the Beverly location. We were out at that the last couple of years at Cork and Kerry Beverly at 10614 Southwestern Avenue. Learn more at corkandkerry.com. Okay, so what did I miss? Because I have an inkling something happened with Benetti. I see he's coming back, and I kept seeing off-season grades. So, but take me through there was a giant balloon floating over the country, which I only heard about at the end. So it sounds
has really nothing to do with the White Sox. And if it did, they would basically not have offered it a contract, and it would have gone to the Twins. So, no, you didn't. That's the thing is perfect time of the year to go on the Bourbon Trail and drink yourself stupid if you're a White Sox fan, because you didn't miss much, right? There was the Franklin German trade, where he's a guy who got DFA'd by the Red Sox.
It's a nothing for nothing. But you know what?
It's a nothing for nothing trade.
If you're identifying guys right now that you think you could turn into bullpen arms, I'm fine with it, because you know what? Bullpen arms are a dime a dozen. It's one of the real issues I've had with the White Sox and Rick Hahn. When he has a certain amount of resources and you have these self-imposed budgets, and Jerry Reinsdorf is the owner that he is, why are you wasting so many resources on your bullpen? And it seems to be a thing over the last couple of years that he's really thrown so much bad money into. You know, I mean, like Liam Hendricks, good signing. Picking up Jake Diekman in that move last year, you're going to eat a lot of money over the next couple of years for a guy who.
And also, you're going to eat a lot of home runs if he's on your team.
Right,
so.
Exactly. I mean, you have some contracts handed out in that bullpen that make you shrug and say, well, look, if you couldn't afford like a second baseman, then why can you afford this extra bullpen arm? So I'm fine with the fact they kind of have to do it this way too, right? I mean, don't they have guys now in this bullpen that you're paying a bunch of money to, and you're kind of stuck with because you couldn't shine up the turd to get it moved, right? Like beginning of the offseason, right. We heard, we're going to make some moves to kind of reshape this team a little bit. And I think that was like code for, we know we got a couple of guys here we're paying money to that probably aren't worth that money. So we're going to convince somebody that they would do better with them. And every other team looked at the White Sox and said, what, you think we don't have scouts of our own? So you're out there and you're grabbing a couple of guys off the scrap heap and you're looking for guys that are being DFA'd. You know, there are so many bullpen arms that could be effective for a year or two if they get the right coach, get used the right way, and you hit them right in the sweet spot of their career. Because most bullpen arms are a dime a dozen.
That's exactly what most bullpen guys are, is just you catch them at the right time, right? You catch Cliff Polite at his best. You catch Neil Kotz at his best. And then neither of them are in the Hall of Fame in spite of what they did in 2005, right? So that's just one of those moves. It's like an under the radar, doesn't really matter move because it was a move that was made. Probably the most interesting thing that happened was Jason Billis is the guy that gets bumped off the 40 man in the trade. And he's a guy that was just identified on the show as being a guy that maybe competes in spring training for the rotation spot that Mike Clevenger should not be put into for right now.
Yeah, well, if you remember that conversation with James Fox in the last episode, and if you missed it, it's on demand just like every other episode, anywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. That is one of the guys he identified. He also talked about Sean Burke, who now I'm seeing all these stories, like as I'm catching up again today, what did I miss over the weekend? That's a guy that you're starting to hear over this weekend. Yeah, he's competing for a spot possibly on the team. And Fox was saying that on this show, and I think that was the first time that I had heard somebody say it out loud, and then it kind of became a thing over the last couple of days. So, you know, he had one guy that got DFA'd and taken off the 40-man, and then he had another guy that, boom, nailed it. Right? And that guy's right in the mix for this offseason.
Yeah, and in the meantime, you know, like you said, you're looking at offseason grades, because that's where we are, right? Pitchers and catchers are going to report soon enough. The offseason is basically done. There's really no more moves to be made. I mean, you could still have a trade here and there, right? Like a Franklin German trade. That's what you're looking at. But the team is on the field, so to speak, as you're going into spring training at this point. So, you know, so you're seeing these offseason grades, and there's nothing to give the White Sox except for a failing score, because you have essentially one transaction that's going to make a difference. You have the Andrew Benintendi signing. Everything else is just minor league deals and like picking Nick Avila up in the Rule 5 draft.
Right. I mean, well, you got minor league deals in the Clevenger mess, and then you have Andrew Benintendi.
I'm not counting the Clevenger mess at this point because it's just a negative on the team.
But here's the thing. The Benintendi thing, the Sox will trumpet. Those that speak for the Sox will trumpet. Those that profit off the Sox will trumpet. Those are affiliated with the Sox. Anybody that is intertwined with the White Sox, their own media company, all that stuff, all of them, they're going to focus on largest contract ever handed out, 5 years, $75 million for Andrew Benintendi. It was a good move. It's also the kind of move that a professional sports team of the White Sox caliber should be doing on a yearly basis. 5 year, $75 million deals shouldn't be something earth-shattering. And it's the only move. That's the thing. You had a team last year that failed to live up to expectations, and you're added Benintendi, you lost Jose Abreu, you lost Johnny Cueto. I don't even know if they're a better team, unless, of course, you are of the belief that everything about last year was Tony La Russa and injuries, and guys are going to come back and all reach their potential, and then get yourself super excited because you're a playoff team. But I mean, that's what the offseason is. And even if that works, it doesn't mean it was a good offseason. It's a bad offseason. It's another thing on the list of bad out of this front office with Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn. You went into an offseason stating what you were going to do. You're going to reshape some things. You're going to make some trades. You're going to move some guys around, and you're going to address the needs that your team has. And you addressed one need, which was getting a legitimate outfielder who can bat likely in the 2-hole and add some speed. Like the Benintendi move's a great move, and it gives you the opportunity to not have to play Eloy Jimenez out in the outfield most days. But there are so many other things that the team needed. And what they basically said was, well, we're pretty maxed out here with the money, and Jerry's not spending anymore. And by the way, we saw you season ticket holders stop renewing your plans, because I see everybody talking about it like on social media, like I'm not going back. I canceled my plan, right? Okay, so we're gonna add like this weird seating pay tier system that is just ridiculous to look at. It makes your head hurts with all the different, like you could be in a section and you could be in row 9 and you're paying more money than the guy in row 10 all over the ballpark, because they're trying to do whatever they can to maintain the income that's coming into the team. So your team didn't do anything this offseason. So you have every right to be disappointed in that, right? You can believe the White Sox can have a good year and be disappointed in the offseason. I think that's the point that I want to make here. I think that you could be disappointed in the offseason and still have positive hopes for the season. That's kind of where I sit.
Well, that's all you can do at this point, right? Is be excited about a team that is still loaded with a bunch of talent that we were looking forward to having on this team and making a run, right? You still have Dylan Cease, you still have Lucas Giolito, you still have Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez. Now you've got Oscar Colas in all likelihood. You've got all that, and you've done well in that regard to have the core of the team, and then you've added Andrew Benintendi on a major league market value contract, which is embarrassingly the highest contract in team history. But the problem is that, like you said, if you look at it on the whole, you've subtracted Jose Abreu, Johnny Cueto, and unfortunately had Liam Hendricks subtracted for you by cancer and by his circumstances. So now you've got 3 major players on last year's team that are gone, and all you've really done is replace one guy, and all it really did was shuffle Eloy Jimenez into the DH role as opposed to having him be the everyday left fielder. So, yeah, disappointing offseason to be sure. Can they still go out and compete and win? Can they still go out and compete and win? Yes, they absolutely can, and you can be excited and go to games and pay slightly more than the guy right behind you, and he can take it out on you by accidentally spilling his beer when Andrew Vaughn hits his 40th home run of the year.
And if you're Eloy Jimenez and you play in the outfield a little bit too much, you may be in need of high-at-home medical equipment.
I see what you did there.
Or if you're older, grandma and grandpa, getting up there, you don't want to put them into assisted living. They will set up the home, make it safe, place aids throughout the house, retrofit bathtubs, set up lifts within the home to bring you from the first floor to the second floor. So many cool things. They could put doors opening and closing on an app so that can be done. It's really interesting, all the systems they have, and they're right here on the south side with a big, beautiful showroom. They got a great website as well at hhme.com, and they will take money off if you mention Sox in the Basement, plus they will work with your insurance. Switch to a new age of life. It's all about staying independent and in the home. Visit Hyatt Home Medical Equipment today in Evergreen Park at 3518 West 95th Street. Okay, see, I think on days when the White Sox, like on a Tuesday or Wednesday, you get that weird day game. You get that game that nobody really wants to go to, right? Where the park's pretty empty.
Yeah.
What do you think it's going to be like looking at that outfield with the tiered pricing? Because in my mind, if you're going to a game like that, you're not buying the nicest ticket, are you? You're not, right? So you're going to be buying like that row 10 or row 15 where the price changes in the outfield now, because it's not all one ticket. So then will the ushers be getting upset when people move up? That'll be a really interesting thing to watch, because, it used to be when I was younger, and I think a lot of people our age will remember this, is that you bought a ticket, got in the ballpark you were in, right? You could sit anywhere you wanted to. When you walked around the original Comiskey Park, the rule my dad would tell me is, wait till the third inning. Pick out a seat while we're sitting here in the outfield, and wait till the third inning. And if nobody has sat in that seat by the third inning, behind the dugout, we're moving over there. Because nobody's going to stop us, and we know we're not taking somebody's seat, because they aren't showing up today. And we would go do that more often than not and have absolutely no problem. And they never stopped you. They never said, are you supposed to be in this section? That stuff comes later on. And the White Sox now will have people standing at the top of each section asking, are you supposed to be in this section? In at least most places in the ballpark. But when you split it up between half of the section and the other half, is there going to be like a really annoying usher sitting at row 10 to double check me again? In the way of the guy sitting in row 12 trying to look through them? Like, how is that going to work? So I think that's going to be really interesting with like just me doing people watching and also kind of watching the game on those days that are not attended very well. It'll be interesting to see what the ballpark looks like. Will I see a bunch of people starting at like row 11 going on back in the outfield and it'll be like empty up in front? Or will it be a free-for-all, and how will they control that? Because they've really gotten themselves, when you look at this weird seating chart, and I know we've mentioned it before, but we really haven't gotten into it very much on this show. But like when you would be motivated to buy in the back rows and then just work your way up because you're past the usher, right? So, I mean, like, that's what I'm expecting it to be like at the ballpark this year. And
that's exactly what it's going to be like, right? Because how would you justify that? You're going on a Tuesday afternoon and you know it's going to be empty, and you do exactly what you said. Okay, so maybe right at the start, you sit there and you go, okay, I'm row 16, and I'm going to look down though, and no one's sitting in row 3. Like, it's an empty row. So how am I not, when I get up to go to, not get a pretzel brat, how am I not going back down there and saying, screw it, I'm going to sit in row 3? And yeah, if somebody comes along and is like, hey, those are my seats. Oh, Joe, shoot. Okay, well, fine. Then you get up and you move, right? Because that's what you do. But the idea that they're going to have ushers standing down there checking pricing tiers as opposed to just sections is not only something that when you said that, I was sitting there going like, yeah, they are, but also something that you would sit there and go, well, that's just ridiculous. Why instead aren't those people, up in the club level doing the service that they used to do? Or why aren't those people?
Well, they didn't have enough people last year to do that.
Well, that's what I mean though. But if they have enough people to sit there and say, there's going to be 2 ushers basically down every aisle, one to make sure that you're in your section and the one to make sure that you're in your pricing tier, then you have enough people to do other functions in the stadium to improve your customer service. So I'm hoping that that's not the case, but I could see them doing it.
Well, remember, they split the upper deck in a lot of ways, where the first certain amount of rows in the upper deck are a different price than even higher, right? I don't know. I haven't been up there in a while. And that 500 level, but are they really walking back? Are they really walking up and down and checking if the person's in the right row? Like, at some point, people just start moving down, right? Especially when you don't have a lot of people are there, is what I'm assuming. But now you look out into the outfield and you have like these first 10 rows or whatever it is that are different from the rest of the thing, but it runs throughout the entire ballpark. It does that now down the third base line and the first base line and all that other stuff like that. And you sit there and you think to yourself, like, you're going to have a lot of people moving around. It's going to be more of a thing because I'm not saying like, I know that there are people that pay for really expensive tickets that are behind the dugout and they're like, this is my seat. You shouldn't be moving down to my seat. Okay, fine. That's how you feel. You spend a lot of money and you're there all the time. And most people that are back there are like 162 game full season, like season ticket holders, right? But the thing is, you're going to see this now throughout the entire state. They had a hard time staffing the place last year. They have a hard time getting people inside the ballpark. Maintaining that and constantly walking around and seat checking people is going to be a really difficult task to do, just so that you could charge a little bit more money for the first few rows in every section, basically, in the ballpark. So, I think it's going to be kind of a silly thing to watch this year. Like, it's not, I don't know if it'll be observable as much when I'm watching on TV, although it would be funny to watch, like, the first 10 rows be empty in a game, and then they're all, like, filled in the back, like on one of those Wednesday games, right? But I think it'll be more interesting people watching as I go to the ballpark and watch the dance of, especially about like the first through fourth innings or first through third innings, where you're seeing people going, this is my seat. Oh, okay. And they're all moving one row back or moving one row forward. And you're going to see more and more of that in the stadium because of all these crazy ticket tiering sections.
Well, and the other thing too is, remember, in the upper deck, when you walk out onto the upper deck, you either can go down to those slightly more expensive seats or you have to go up. And that's where they're stationed. You have one way you can go. When you're coming from the concourse and going down towards the field, it's not like you're popping up in the middle of the section the way you are in the 500 level. So if they are doing that, that's my point, is if they are spending the time doing that to seat check you, I'm not saying logistically it's not difficult. I'm saying if that's where they expend their resources, I'm going to be extremely disappointed. So my hope is that it's one of those things where you're going to have people buy and spend more money on the seats up front, and then they're going to be self-policing and they're saying, no, I paid for these. Get your section, your row 16 back to coach there. I'm up here in first
row
class.
16, you peasant.
Yeah, you little rotten underling.
Goodness. But here's the thing: I'm never sitting in the first rows. Like every time I go to a game, I'll be like, all right, well, where does it start where it's a little bit cheaper? Because it's the same seat. Like, that's what's crazy about it.
Well, that's the thing.
There are times where I'm in that ballpark and I'm amazed by what people spend for seats. And like, you'll never get me going, oh, well, I really need to be in row 8. No, I'll be always like, oh, put me in row 11 in the outfield. It's the same damn view. Like, why would I give extra money for that? So I don't know. To me, again, it's another one of those things where you sit there and you go, do they really think out things before they do them?
Nope.
And then if they really did, and it'll be one of those things they'll react to. Like, they didn't think it out, right? Like, my assumption after being a fan of this team for as many decades as I've been a fan of this team and watching a Jerry Reinsdorf organization run is that they have an idea of how it's going to work. And then when it doesn't work the way they want it to, they'll overreact and start policing the whole thing. They won't have the personnel to be able to do it. And it'll be just a mess. Like, it'll just be one more thing that you roll your eyes and you go, why are we this like the ticky-tackiest operation in baseball? I just can't wait to watch it in action.
Oh, it'll be wonderful.
Yeah, I want to see the team. I want to be into the team. But when they're getting blown out or they're blowing somebody out, I'll be sitting around drinking a beer going, watch this. This is great. Look at this. She's been down there 4 times. They have those guys move one row.
Yeah.
You'll be laughing about it throughout the game. And the next time I actually have a drink, I'm going to Hailstorm Brewing Company in Tinley Park, 8060 186th Street, right off of 80th Avenue. A working brewery. You can watch them churn out the beers, big giant beer hall, great tap room, incredible food, live music on the weekends, trivia nights, and other fun events. Check out their brand new American Stout. Why don't you go stout about it? 7.5%, little bit of bite to it. Hearty. That's what I would describe it as. Follow their Facebook page at Hailstorm Brewing Co. to see all of their events and see everything they have to offer at hailstormbrewing.com.
Again, here we are. I think this is the funny part, right? We're talking about a team that should be going for the AL Central, and you and I are spending our time talking about how they're going to potentially police where you sit versus where you've purchased your tickets. And people are gnashing their teeth over Jason Benetti and his contract negotiations. And this is the news that comes out while you're out drinking. You should have just stayed on the bourbon trail, man.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, it's an old story about the ticket thing. We never really got into it. But to be honest with you, I already know what the team is. We said what the team is. The team is what the team is. Their hope is that the team is healthier. And that the manager isn't screwing it up like the manager was last year, because he was a massive influence, a negative influence on the team. Tony La Russa was a negative influence on the outcome of games. Plus, you were dealing with guys that are in down years and guys that were dealing with injuries. So they're hoping that just fixes everything, right? And they're stuck with their self-imposed budget. And they've got certain contracts that they're kind of stuck with because they can't get anybody else to take those contracts. They went out and they made 2 signings. One of them was really good, and the other one, maybe you should have done a little bit more research on the guy, because now you're dealing with that whole mess. So the team is the team. All you could do now is see whether or not they get lucky and everything works out the way it's supposed to for them, or if it doesn't. And I feel positive about the team overall, and I'm willing to give them a shot and watch them. But that's why we're talking about the silly things now, because that's all we really have. If they would have gone out and made a bunch of signings and we were sitting there going, oh, how do you think this guy's going to fit here? And what do you think they're going to do with the order here? But I mean, I know Andrew Benintendi is coming in. He's playing left field. He's probably batting second. All right, cool. Yep, that's it. That's what I have.
Lennon Sosa and Romy Gonzalez are going to cover second base, and they're going to bat ninth.
Yeah, that's what they are. Oscar Colas is going to get right field, and he's going to strike out a lot more than you want him to. But if he is just acceptable out there in right field, then you're going to be fine with him batting in like the 7 or 8 hole on your team.
We're going to watch a lot of Davis Martin and Sean Burke in the spring training games and see which one of them wins that.
See which one they are. Yeah. Exactly. And so then what you do is you get stuck looking at all the other little stories, like the Benetti thing. Like I saved this towards the end because what the heck? People are all upset about the fact that Jason Benetti had to go negotiate his own contract and he couldn't use an agent. Okay. And I'm going to sound like a jerk saying this, but I don't care. Every place I ever worked in media, I had to go negotiate my own thing. I know that here in this major market, we're all just convinced that everybody's got agents. They really don't. Look, if you're a broadcaster, from the moment you start talking on a microphone, and Jason Benetti would admit that, he's been on this show before, we've talked about what it's like coming up, okay? When you're doing anything, radio broadcasting, doing play-by-play, anything of the sort, the entire time from the moment you start, they're doing something called air checking you, where somebody who's normally your boss, like a program director, or somebody else who's like, actually has some sort of influence over you and where you're going in that company or in your career, is listening. And they're very critical of everything you're doing. They're like, why'd you say that? You say too many times. You're not painting the right picture. Like you sit down almost on a daily basis and get criticized and have to re-listen to everything because that's how you get better. If you're not doing that, you don't learn how to get better. So I read the article about it. I think the Sun Times had it, and I can't remember. Again, I was in a fog of bourbon over the weekend. But wherever I read the whole thing at, it seemed like the one bone of contention that I got from everybody that I could tell was that, he has to go in there and defend himself like an arbitration player. Okay. But, I'd be in a town where I was hired to come in and get them into number 1 or a top 3 ranking here or whatever like that. I would accomplish it. And when it came time for me to sit down and talk my contract again, they didn't let me bring in any agents. And I would sit down and they would tell me all the things they think I do badly. And I would go, okay, fine, but I do all these other things very well. And this is what I cost. And if I didn't like it, I went and I worked someplace else. He's working everywhere right now, right? Like, I'm very critical of the White Sox. But if the only argument was, we want to make sure you're at enough of our games that matter because you're the voice of the White Sox, I think they should be allowed to say that, right? Like, we're not privy to what happened inside of the negotiations, but this is like the most non-story story that's floating around right now because like we said, there's nothing going on and the team didn't do very much in the offseason. How many times can you grade them and give them an F or a D- on their offseason?
Well, that's a good question, and the answer is pretty much once on the grades. And then, with the Jason thing, the White Sox and Jason Benetti are very, very free to sit there and go and say that we have different ideas as to what we expect. And Steve Stone has a different idea as to what he wants versus what the White Sox are willing to give. And if they want to be here and the Sox want him here, they're going to come to a compromise. And that's how the world works, man. It just is what it is.
That's life.
But
like, here's the thing. I'm a fan of his. I'm going to be honest with you. I enjoy his games. But I remember when he came on this show and we talked about how hard it is to kind of move into this and to be in this profession. And there's a lot of former athletes that, like, the kid that goes to school to be a broadcaster has to also compete with to find his way in. When you're talking about Jason Benetti and you talk about Hawk Harrelson wasn't a broadcaster. He was a former player that had a personality and ended up in the broadcast booth. Ed Farmer was not as good of a broadcaster as John Rooney. I know it's sacrilege to say because we all love Ed Farmer and he's a nice guy. But when he was the color guy and John Rooney was the play-by-play guy, John Rooney was a professional broadcaster. And we lost him after 2005 because he was talented enough to go anywhere he wanted to. You're essentially a free agent. He didn't like what the White Sox had to say. They're like, we'll just have Farmio do it. And anybody that listened to Rooney do it with Farmer as the color guy could tell the difference the next year because Farmer wasn't Rooney. And he never was. He got better at his craft, but he never was the professional broadcaster of Rooney. And when I look at a guy like Benetti, I feel great for him. Here's a guy to remember. His first year with the White Sox was him filling in whenever he could and Harrelson not getting out of the way. And he sat there and he worked his way through that. You know what? He's come up. Now he's got national exposure. He can go work anywhere he wants to. And there are a lot of other guys out there that probably could get an opportunity to go do what he does. They may be better. They may be worse. But this is how media works. You know, I think in Chicago, we get a little spoiled because we see the same people all the time. Like, you know, some guy gets fired from a station and 2 weeks later, he's on at a different station in this town. Nationally, it's not the same way. So to me, like, I'm glad they're bringing him back. I was just surprised by all the indignation over it. I can criticize the White Sox about a lot of things, but if they decide they want to have a negotiation with a guy and they think that he's worth A and he thinks he's worth B and they want to negotiate with him face to face instead of going through a proxy, that's how they do business. That's how they do business. So that's what I thought was kind of weird about it.
Yeah, well, and again, I think it's just we're so trained at this point to just assume that whatever the White Sox are doing is short-sighted lunacy that we're willing to take even when they do regular course of business type things that have nothing to do with being a lunatic or being short-sighted or incompetent, but it's just basically like, yes, we have to negotiate with our broadcasters because they need a contract and we need to pay them an appropriate amount of money, that we sit there and go, but the White Sox are morons. And then, yeah. So,
well, look, they are in a lot of ways. Again, the front office, I don't understand why they're in charge of anything. But you know what? Here's the thing. They're running a company and they're like, you're valuable because you're a really good broadcaster. But if we can't come to an agreement, we'll have somebody else call games. And we're not going to, how many fans are going to be like, well, I'm done with the White Sox? Not because of the terrible offseason moves, but because Benetti's not on anymore. I mean, is that realistic? Is that what we really believe as fans?
That's realistic. I mean, no.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found and always on soxinthebasement.com.